Benjamin Netanyahu says the U.S. needs to reaffirm its alliances with its traditional allies in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia. The incoming Prime Minister telling the Dubai-based Saudi Al Arabiya channel he plans to tell President Joe Biden that while Israel's alliance with the U.S. is unbreakable, the traditional alliance with Saudi Arabia and other countries has to be reaffirmed. Netanyahu says he thinks peace with Saudi Arabia will be a quantum leap for an overall peace between Israel and the Arab world. So for more insight, our correspondent Pierre Steckelbach is here in studio. And Pierre, Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have formal ties. They are unified, though, in their concerns around the Iranian threat. But talk to us about what is being made about Benjamin Netanyahu's comments in this interview and what it means for Israel and Arab nations right now.
Well, first of all, Benita, I think it is very interesting that this interview took place at all. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, since the elections, did not really speak to Israeli media. He gave a few interviews to U.S. media, now Al Arabiya. They're sitting in Dubai, but they're still Saudi affiliated. Now, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia and Israel do not have formal diplomatic relations. Saudi Arabia is not part of the Abraham Accords. And Saudi Arabia is still saying that they will not normalize until the Palestinian issue is solved. Now, there have been lots of talks and rumors in recent weeks that normalization with Saudi Arabia is somewhat on the horizon and that it might only be an issue of time. Now Netanyahu is saying that the U.S. should strengthen relations with specifically Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. That goes kind of in the same direction because if you remember, U.S. and Saudi relations have been strained, especially after the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul in 2018. After that, 2 years after, U.S. President Joe Biden said that or declared Saudi Arabia pariah state that really much strained Saudi and U.S. relations. Now, this year, Joe Biden has visited on his Middle East tour Saudi Arabia, and that was kind of seen as some sort of relaxations of these relations. And, you know, Netanyahu knows how important U.S. and Saudi relations are for the dynamics in the region. You know, he is positive that Saudi and Israeli normalization will happen, and he knows that there might be some triangle of relations against Iran because, you know, both the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, they are very critical of Iran and its nuclear capabilities. And Netanyahu knows that he needs allies in the region to really deal with this Iranian threat. So we might think that there could be this coalition of powers against Iran once Saudi Arabia also joins the normalizations.
Benjamin Netanyahu also trying to calm fears. There's been a lot of outrage and concern over the far-right influence over this incoming government, particularly when it comes to defense issues, security issues, and housing and expansion in the West Bank. But Netanyahu says at the end of the day, the policy buck, so to speak, stops with him.
Exactly. Well, he basically said that he's not going to hand over great powers in the West Bank, that all the decisions that need to be made will be made by him personally and by the defense minister. Now, this came after the interview asked him, you know, if he's not concerned that there's a lot of backlash, that he's about to give away powers to his far-right allies. Now, in this interview, Netanyahu basically reaffirmed that the ultimate power of decision will be with him and with the defense minister. Now, we know that Bezalel Smotrich from Religious Zionism was eyeing that post of defense minister, and that really much was where the backlash was coming, to appoint someone from the very much far right as a defense minister, somebody who also doesn't really have a defense background. But as it looks like right now, Netanyahu will appoint a person from his own party, Yoav Gallant, from his own Likud party as defense minister. Now, there were a few other issues that also Netanyahu touched upon in this interview that were really interesting. He again reiterated his opposition to the maritime border deal with Lebanon. He said that also when it was signed, he said that such a deal must go through the Knesset, that such a deal cannot be done by an interim government that was in place back then. He also talked about Iran, about the fact that he doesn't think that an agreement with Iran could help anything, that an agreement with Iran is realistic, that he again is against the JCPOA negotiations. Then, and this is particularly interesting, the interview asked if he would go through and pursue an aggression against Iran, even if Washington would not approve of it. And Benjamin Netanyahu said that he will do anything to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and he wouldn't call it an aggression to protect Israel, but that the answer is yes, that he would go forward with an aggression, with an operation against Iran, even if Washington would not approve.
A far-reaching and interesting interview with Al Arabiya. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us.